Has the world forgotten the people of Kashmir? I'll ask a spokesman for India's BJP government why millions there are still under lockdown. I'm Mehdi Hassan. Bolivia's President Evo Morales was forced to resign from office and flee to Mexico after a disputed election and pressure from the military. Was it a coup? That's our debate. But first, the BJP government in India is no stranger to controversy. This week, it welcomed a Supreme Court decision authorizing the construction of a Hindu temple on the site of a demolished mosque, while Prime Minister Narendra Modi's brutal lockdown of Kashmir is now more than 100 days old. So, what happened to human rights and the rule of law in the world's biggest democracy? This week's headliner from New Delhi, BJP national spokesperson Gaurav Bhatia. Gaurav Bhatia, welcome to UpFront. You're the national spokesperson for the ruling BJP party in India. The party you speak for has been in power now for more than 5 years. It governs what many call the largest democracy on earth. Would you say that India today is still a liberal, secular democracy, one that respects the rule of law and guarantees rights, dignity, equality to all of its citizens?
Absolutely. And Mehdi, I'm sure that even you wouldn't have doubts on that. It's a country which is governed by rule of law. There is a constitution in place, government, a strong leadership provided by Narendra Modi ji, and also a Supreme Court, which is one of the most revered institutions in the country, which ensures that fundamental rights protected to every citizen are, given to the citizen, and they deserve the very best.
That's good to hear. So how then do you explain that in August of this year, your government suspended the freedom of movement of more than 8 million of its own citizens, cut off their internet and telephone access for more than 2 months, arbitrarily detained thousands of them from elected politicians to school kids? I'm talking, of course, about the lockdown in Indian-administered Kashmir since August the 5th. Which other democracy on earth treats its own citizens in this way?
So I will tell you, the entire nation has applauded the historical decision taken by Narendra Modi ji. And the reason is very clear. Article 370, when it was framed by the Constituent Assembly that gave us the Constitution of India, was always meant to be temporary. In fact, it starts with the word temporary. Now, when a historical decision is taken, which ought to have been taken earlier, you have to ensure the safety of the lives of every Indian and also the Kashmiris who are there. So life of a citizen definitely is far more important than the civil liberties that you are talking about, which also, if curbed, they were curbed in accordance with the law permitted under the Constitution and various statutes that prevail in our country. Now, yes, you are right when you talk about telephone connections, internet connections and mobile phones. But let me tell you how normalcy has been restored there. Police stations, only 100 out of 115, 101 police stations in the Valley region have no restrictions whatsoever.
You can argue the rights and wrongs of Article 370, which gave Jammu and Kashmir this special status under the Indian Constitution. But what we're talking about is what the United Nations' own human rights experts have called collective punishment. UN human rights experts from US, from France, from Canada, from Togo, they said in August, and I quote, "The blackout is a form of collective punishment of the people of Jammu and Kashmir without even a pretext of a precipitating offense." And multiple human rights groups agree with them.
I have full faith in the Honorable Supreme Court of India. Just the way 130 crores, 1.3 billion have their faith in the most revered institution. The Honorable Supreme Court, if you're not aware, I'll make you aware, is seized with the matter. Now, the Honorable Supreme Court asked the petitioner, who was, appearing before the court and his counsel, that if we remove the curbs that have been put in place by the government, would you take the responsibility of every human life there? And what if a human life is lost? And the petitioner's counsel had no answer. But I can very, proudly say one thing on your program, that not a single Kashmiri has, lost his life due to a bullet fired by the army or the police in Jammu and Kashmir. It is unfortunate and very saddening that some of the Kashmiris have lost their lives. You know why? Because they are being targeted by the extremists, they are being targeted by the terrorists there.
Okay.
And as Narendra Modi on the United Nations platform said, that terrorism is something that the entire globe has to unite and fight against terrorism.
Okay, Gaurav Bhatia, in a democracy, nobody should be above the law. I think you and I can both agree on that. And yet, India has passed laws which allow security forces to kill with what United Nations investigators have called impunity. They say there are virtual impunity against prosecution for any human rights violation. In the nearly 28 years that your laws have been enforced, this is what the UN says, there has not been a single prosecution of armed forces personnel for alleged extrajudicial killings, rape, enforced disappearances. Why haven't you prosecuted any soldiers who are accused of these crimes?
So let me first tell you that our army is the most disciplined army in the world. And yes, if there is any aberration, you said, why has no one been penalized? This was your question, right?
That's what the UN, that was the UN's question.
Okay. So, Mehdi, let me, since I'm also a senior advocate who practices in the Honorable Supreme Court, I will give you a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. And the Honorable Supreme Court came down very heavily on all these, incidents where excessive force was used. And an investigation was ordered, and it's right there on, with me in my hand. And, this is the order of the Supreme Court, where if any force used excessive force, a probe was ordered and people have been prosecuted, investigation was done. So I think factually you are incorrect.
Okay. We're running out of time. I do want to move on to other big issues. One last question on Kashmir. You say that it's a matter of national security. You talk about terrorism. You talk about protecting people's lives. But you're not just arresting people there who are violent, are you? You have detained without trial, without charge, 3 former Indian chief ministers of what you once called the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. One of them is Mehbooba Mufti, who was in coalition with your party, the BJP, until just last year. But now suddenly she's locked up as well.
So, Bharti, first of all, I think you will agree that, to disagree with any of the government decision is fine, but you cannot incite violence because under our constitution, even the right to freedom of speech and expression comes with a rider that there can be reasonable restrictions on the exercise of the right, especially in the interest of our sovereignty and integrity of India. Mehbooba Mufti was a former chief minister, took oath of the constitution that she will protect and preserve the constitution of India and its spirit. And do you know the statement that she made? She said, if Article 370 and 35A, and Article 370 is temporary. So if it is abrogated, then there would be no one left to even honor the tricolor. That's our national flag. And I think it is highly inflammatory.
Yeah, but come on, Gaurav. You and I both know Indian politicians, including yourself, say lots of inflammatory statements. She's being detained without charge. Why not try her then? Put her on trial. You have detained her without charge. You have detained 3 former chief ministers. Democracies are not supposed to detain people without charge or without a trial.
Let me explain that to you. You are wrong there as well. Mehdi, there is a law in India which is called the preventive detention. Okay, you can keep a person under preventive detention for the greater good of the country and the state, and the provisions
without charge.
And I ask you,
without charge, Gaurav.
No, please.
But without charge, just to clarify for our viewers, without charge, yes or no?
Public Safety Act is the act in question.
But it's without charge, right? You can hold someone without charge. You're a lawyer. You know the importance of that statement. No, you said I'm wrong. What am I wrong about? Is she being held without charge? It's a very simple question.
I will tell you. The grounds under which you detain a person and keep that person in preventive detention have to be furnished to the individual. And if anyone is agreed, and Mehdi, you will agree with me, the High Court of Jammu and Kashmir is also there, a habeas corpus petition which was filed, more than 400 habeas corpus were filed, and also the Honorable Supreme Court is there. The legal remedy can be availed. So I ask you, why is it that Mehbooba Mufti for the last 3 months have not moved the court, or any of her next friend moved the court? There are reasons. The reason is only this, that they want to spread propaganda. They are not worried about the Kashmiris. They only care for them.
Are you holding 3 former chief ministers without charge or trial? Yes or no?
In one line, I answer. Anybody who is under preventive custody is in preventive custody in accordance with law.
You didn't answer my question. Are they being held without charge or trial? Yes or no? It's one word. You don't need one sentence. Yes or no?
No. I'm saying you're wrong there.
Which charge? So they have been charged. So they have been charged.
You have to understand the law of preventive detention.
Yes, it's a very controversial law because it allows you to detain people without charge or trial.
Yeah.
That's why it's so controversial.
No, maybe it's not. It's not controversial. Say if a former chief minister who has made inflammatory speeches and the government feels should be detained for the larger interest, feels that her fundamental right has been violated, then move the court.
Okay.
How can we be in disagreement with that?
Okay. This week, India's Supreme Court ruled that the location in the holy city of Ayodhya, where a centuries-old mosque was torn down by mobs in 1992, could now be replaced with a Hindu temple, and local Muslims could be given land elsewhere to build a mosque. It's also believed to be the birthplace of the Hindu god Ram, of course. Do you agree with that verdict from the Supreme Court? Did you welcome it?
Yes, we absolutely welcomed it.
So do you agree with the Supreme Court that the destruction of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya by Hindu nationalist mobs in 1992 was, quote, an egregious violation of the rule of law? You agree with that?
The Honorable Supreme Court has made it very clear in its judgment, and all law-abiding citizens can, criticize the Supreme Court judgment for valid reasons, but they are bound to at least follow it in letter and spirit.
Yes, so do you agree with the Supreme Court verdict that the mob which tore down the mosque in 1992, many of them members of the VHP and other Hindu nationalist groups, they committed, quote, an egregious violation of the rule of law? You agree with that? The Honourable Supreme Court, which you've been praising throughout this interview, says that. You agree with them?
Why are you selectively quoting the Honourable Supreme Court? Because the Honourable Supreme Court...
I'm asking, do you agree that the mosque demolition was an egregious violation of the rule of law? You keep telling me the Supreme Court is amazing in your country. Do you agree with the Supreme Court? Yes or no?
I'm saying that the Supreme Court judgment was welcomed by my party. The Honourable Supreme Court judgment also said that there existed a structure where Hindus had prayed and it was demolished, and on top of that, a mosque was made.
And Gaurav, I'm asking you a simple question. The court also said that the demolition of the mosque by mobs in 1992 was an egregious violation of the rule of law. Do you welcome that, or are you cherry-picking from the verdict?
I agree with the verdict given as a unanimous verdict by the 5 judges of the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And they invoked Article 142 of the Constitution to do complete justice to all sides.
Good to hear. I'm glad to hear you say you welcome it, because the mob that tore down the mosque in December 1992 was at a rally, just for our viewers to know, it was at a rally organized according to a government commission by the right-wing Hindu nationalist group, the VHP. Leaders of the BJP spoke at that rally. So people, allies of yours, members of your party were involved, according to the Supreme Court verdict, in an egregious crime. Isn't that the case, according to the Supreme Court?
Maybe I think, again, you want to cherry pick and just ask me about one of the findings of the Honorable
Yes, I do. I want to ask you about one of the findings, and you won't answer me. So I think the viewers can make up their mind as to why you don't want to answer me. One last question I'll ask you on this subject. Is there a danger that the Supreme Court ruling sets a worrying precedent for India, that mobs can now tear down other mosques and say there was a temple there and the Supreme Court will back us up? One of your MPs last year said that the Taj Mahal should be converted into a temple also. Is the Taj Mahal next as well?
There is already an act in place which ensures that the status of any of the place of worship will not be changed. There is an act, and the Honorable Supreme Court has also mentioned that law in the judgment that we are discussing. But, I think it was heartening to see that justice was also given to the members of the Muslim community, and they were also provided an alternate site of 5 acres. And I think our country, in its diversity, is still unified. And we are the most vibrant democracy, a secular one, and I take a lot of pride in that.
And do you condemn then your BJP colleague Vinay Katia, who said last year that the Taj Mahal will also be converted into the Tej Mandir soon? Do you condemn him for saying that?
Maybe I'll make it very clear to you that you must always go by what the senior leaders of the party are saying, like Narendra Modi.
I agree, and you're
like
a senior
Amit Shah.
spokesman. I agree with you, which is why I've invited you on the show, and I'm saying, why not condemn this member of your party, who was a former vice president of your party, who said the Taj Mahal will be converted into Tej Mandir soon?
So, Mehdi, I will just assure you that it is one of the 7 wonders of the world, and the character of that place will never be changed. We take a lot of pride in that historical monument, and I think that very well answers your question.
Gaurav Bhatia, thank you for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you.
Evo Morales was once one of Latin America's most popular presidents, an indigenous union leader who introduced sweeping social reforms and economic growth to Bolivia. But after a controversial round of elections last month, followed by violent protests and pressure from his own military, Morales was forced to resign and flee to Mexico. So is his resignation a triumph for democracy and people power, or the product of a military coup? Joining me to debate this are Mark WEISBROT, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, who's been writing on Bolivia for more than a decade, and Ian VASQUEZ, director of the Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity at the CATO Institute, and also an expert on Latin America. Thank you both for joining me in the arena.
Thanks, matey.
Thank you.
Ian, let's start with you. Is it fair to describe the resignation of Evo Morales as a coup?
No, not by any stretch of the imagination. Let's remember how he got here. This election was illegal to begin with. The Constitution of Bolivia does not allow a second re-election for the president. And so in 2016, the president actually had a referendum to change the Constitution, and the population voted no. He decided to neglect paying attention to that, and went ahead and had his compliant constitutional tribunal issue a decree, a judgment that allowed him to run against his own very constitution. And so that made people in Bolivia very upset, obviously, because it's undemocratic. And so when he ran here, he was losing, and as the votes were being tallied, he was behind, and this meant that it would have to go to a second round.
He wasn't behind. He was leading, but he wasn't leading by the 10% you needed.
That's right. But
to avoid a runoff.
He was behind avoiding a runoff. And so without any explanation, they stopped reporting the results, and then 24 hours later, he had just about half of a percentage point. He reversed the tendencies at the last minute. And this is something that international observers, including the Organization of American States, viewed as fraudulent in a very detailed review of what happened there.
Mark, coup or no coup?
Well, I think that's a very simple question. When the military tells a sitting democratically elected president that he has to resign, and I think Ian made a little bit of a mistake because he was trying to say that because he doesn't agree with Evo running for a 4th term, that he's not a legitimate president. Even if you agree with that, even if I were to agree with that position, which I don't, because I think the highest court is the law of the land, just like in the United States. The fact is, nobody disputes that he is right now a democratically elected president until his term ends in January.
Okay, so just deal with the point that Ian raised about the sudden change in the votes that people have talked about. The OAS, the Organization of American States, published what many believe to be a damning report questioning the integrity of the October 20th election. They said there was, quote, clear manipulation and, quote, serious security flaws. You reject that report. Why?
It's very simple, actually. The OAS expressed surprise and doubts about that process that you described, where the election was interrupted, and he came back with a higher margin at 95% of the vote counted than he had at 83% of the results reported, okay?
Yeah.
And there actually was nothing suspicious about that at all, because if you look at the data, you can see that there was not a jump in his margin. It was a steady trend from almost the beginning of the reporting of the results, and it was for a very simple reason. The reason is that the later reporting areas, the ones that reported their vote results later, were much more pro-Evo than the earlier ones. I think the OAS misrepresented it deliberately because they said it 3 times. They never offered any evidence of that story, even in the final, even in their preliminary audit report, which is the one you referred to.
Okay.
No, they didn't.
Okay,
they didn't offer any evidence for that
You made your
story.
argument. Let Ian respond.
Yeah.
The report is a very detailed 13-page single-spaced report where they find a lot of problems with manipulation, including breaches of security, so much that they can't even be confident of the results that were reported. Problems with tampering with the tally sheets, forged signatures, tallies that have more people voting than were actually registered there, and they do a detailed statistical analysis that shows that after they stopped reporting the voting, which was very untransparent, they had other people, apparently an unnamed person, go into the database and start putting in some of those new tallies, and all of a sudden a spike that reversed the tendencies in the last.
That's false. I'm sorry. You can read it all.
And not only that,
but the report does talk about forged signatures, for example.
By the way,
that's not an issue of statistics.
No, I think that's true in every election. There are irregularities. The OAS is not neutral here, and they've done this before. In Haiti in 2011, in Haiti in 2000, they put their finger on the scale of these reports. And
Mark, it's not just the OAS, though, is it? For example, the companies in Bolivia that were charged with counting the votes, the manager of the company, Neotech, says there were invalid actions. They say that they got a phone call from the Electoral Tribunal on the night of the 20th telling them to suspend the publication of the results.
No. Okay,
there's another
let
one,
me
too.
answer that, okay? That's very important.
Yeah, it is important. It sounds pretty dodgy to an outsider.
First of all, you will not find, in the hundreds of articles in the media, you will not find one expert saying that story was true, that they somehow manipulated the vote count between the 84% report and the 95% one.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, was there are you saying there wasn't a phone call from a member of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal?
I have no idea. Anybody can make any allegation they want.
But they're pretty damning allegations, aren't they?
Well,
They're worth
only if
investigating.
they're true.
Of course. That applies to any allegation, obviously.
Okay. But I'm saying that you have a story here that's been repeated every day in the media, and most of your viewers believe it.
All I'm saying is it's not just the OAS.
Oh yeah, but that, anybody can say anything. Okay. Where's the evidence?
Okay, let me ask you this question.
By the way, the Electoral Council also hired an independent audit that came to the same conclusions. That's the government.
Ian, let me ask you this question. How do you explain the fact that if it's all about, the election being tainted, the first round not being properly counted, Evo Morales, admittedly days after the election, but did sit down and say, you know what? We'll allow in the UN to check this. We'll rerun the first round. We will try and come to an agreement that avoids violence and further protests. And it was the opposition who walked away and said, no, we don't want to do it. Why? If they think that they're winning, why not allow the UN to come in and manage another rerun?
Because they didn't consider him to be legitimately running to begin with. They considered
then why did they run against him? They ran against him. They didn't boycott the election.
Because at that point,
you can't have it both ways. We're going to run against you, and then when we lose, we say you're not a legitimate president.
Actually, that happens all the time under authoritarian regimes. Maybe not. I'm not in control of what they do, but that happens all the time. But remember, this happens in the context of a regime that has become increasingly authoritarian, denounced by international human rights groups, like Human Rights Watch, international press groups that denounce the kind of actions against journalists that are arbitrarily jailed. People are fed up with the violations of democracy. It turned into an autocracy, and the military would not repress the population.
Do you want to respond to that?
By any means, this is not a military coup. By the way, they're not involved in the new
government. We'll come to the new government in a moment.
That's a very good point you made. The military, first of all, the military was involved. They told them to step down. But the point you made, I think, was very important, that this whole question of the latest election has become moot because Evo immediately accepted the recommendations of the OAS for a new election and a new electoral council, but the opposition wanted a coup, and so that's what they got.
A lot of people are worried about the far right in places like Bolivia. You have a senator, who just declared herself the president of the country. On what grounds is she the president of the country? She also turned up at the palace with a Bible saying, I'm bringing the Bible back to the presidential palace, which many people see as a dig at indigenous communities.
All of the top people in the government, the previous government, resigned and created a vacuum. She has stepped up because she's the one that was.
Was it wise of
left.
her to say God has allowed the Bible to come back into the presidential palace?
No, I don't think so. But
For the other opposition leader, Luis
that's why I
Camacho, to say
I don't
to
think
stand
so.
in front of an image of the Virgin Mary with a rosary in his right hand.
I don't think so. But you know,
not exactly uniting the country, is it?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they should be focusing. I think they need to be focusing on setting up the next elections and getting a consensus about setting up a new legitimate democratic government.
Evo Morales is in Mexico. He says he will return. Do you think he will?
Yeah, I think he will. I mean, look, there's been violent attempts to overthrow this government by the right for quite some time. They tried in 2008. And the reason they don't have, Bolivia doesn't have ambassadorial relations with the United States is because the U.S. supported those violent movements. And so they broke their ambassadorial relations. So this is a very classic coup. I mean, it's not that different from the United States intervening in many other countries in Latin America, not just in the 21st century.
This is the story of an authoritarian regime that people in Bolivia got sick of, and they did what they could to get their democracy back. The military decided not to repress them, and now they're having an interim government to restore democracy finally after many years.
We'll have to leave it there. Ian, Mark, thank you both for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.